Hey gang, Rod Cumberland at East Coast Lumberjack. And I've been teaching chainsaw safety courses the last few weeks, have a few more courses up and coming. I've been a certified chainsaw safety instructor since 1986. So I've got about 36 years under my belt. And I've taught a lot of guys to sharpen chainsaws, from professional loggers right down to beginners and novices. And I love teaching the course because it's so practical. So this is my gift back to YouTube, the YouTube world, for everybody that types in and says, how do you sharpen a chainsaw? Now there's a couple of good videos. I've actually gone through YouTube. There's a few good videos out there of how to sharpen using certain types of sharpening devices. There's a guy that's tested a lot of them. Can't remember his name. And then there's, I think it's called Farmcraft. He did a pretty darn good video on sharpening a chain. So I want to use the props that I have, because I've got some things that make it look a whole lot easier and simpler on YouTube. And I want to explain to you a few things that I have not yet heard on how to sharpen a chain. So I was taught how to sharpen a chainsaw really well by my grandfather, Leo. And he showed me how to do it freehand and using a file and no guides. So that's typically how I file my chainsaws. But I have, in my days, teaching this at chainsaw courses over the years. This is the Husqvarna chainsaw sharpener. It's a roller guide. It works really well. The other one that I also teach people to use is this one. It's called the flat type bar file holder. So it's another one that we use a lot. So I'm going to do 3 separate videos. This first one, generally how to sharpen a chainsaw, then a couple other ones, how to use a Husqvarna filing guide, a roller guide, and also how to use a flat type, because people, they have these good tools, but they can't get the chain sharp because of a few things that they're missing, and I want to touch on those right now. So quickly, this is your chainsaw tooth. Now this is the parts of the chainsaw tooth. What you really need to know, this is the side plate cutting angle, this is the top plate. And the top plate of your chainsaw chain is coated with chrome. Okay, that's what holds the edge. It's several Rockwell harder than the metal in your tooth. So what holds the edge on your tooth is this chrome, which is why those new type of chainsaw sharpening devices that clamp on the end of your bar, what they do is the chain rotates around, beats off of a stone in there, and it actually takes off the chrome on your tooth. Now, I make no bones about it when that comes up on Facebook or anywhere on social media to tell you that that is a terrible system. It will ruin your chain and you'll go through them like crazy. So do not buy one of those gimmicks. The best way to sharpen it is with a file. So this is your cutter tooth. This whole thing is a cutter tooth, and you have a left-handed, then a right-handed cutter. That's what you have on your chainsaw chain, and they alternate back and forth, as everyone knows. And this here is called your depth gauge. The old guys used to call these rakers, because when they used to file the old crosscuts and box saws, there was rakers and there was teeth. And you used to sharpen the teeth, you used to have to file down the rakers, and the rakers pulled out the chips from the gullet, into the gullet. On a chainsaw chain, this is called a depth gauge because it gauges the depth of wood that hits your tooth. Now there's a few things I want to tell you about. So the depth gauge, actually I taught a few of my friends here just a few weeks ago, older guys that had worked, run a chainsaw for years and years and years, and could not figure out what happened, because after a while their chains stopped cutting. And what happens is, if you can see here, this cutter tooth is sloped. So every time you file, you're dropping the height of your tooth to where the depth gauge says how much wood approaches a tooth. So obviously, after 2 or 3 or 4 filings, you need to drop the height of your depth gauge. Okay, and there's a tool for doing that, the depth gauge sharpening tool. There's a lot of different ones. They're just different tools. This one, this here is a steel. It looks very similar. Okay, and you use it on the end here. I've got a third one, somewhere's in my box. So they go on, they cover the front of the tooth that's sharp to keep you from hitting it and dulling it. And you file on the depth gauge, you file from the inside of the tooth to the outside. And if you don't do that, you'll find out in a hurry why. It'll dull your file really quickly, and it's like hearing fingernails down a chalkboard. Okay, so that's the depth gauge. That should be 25 thousandths of an inch down for hardwoods, 35 1/1000ths down for hardwoods. Now, the key to having a sharp chain, I hope everyone's listening, and I haven't heard this yet on any of the videos, is the part of this tooth that's called the working corner, and that is this point right here. Okay, this point, if you hit a nail or something hard, rocks, this point will dull. And what happens is it dulls back along the side plate a little bit. You'll see it actually bent in right back along the side plate. In order to get your chain sharp again, you have to go back so that this is a point once more. It has to be sharp. This is the first piece of your chainsaw cutter tooth that hits the wood after your wood rides over the depth gauge. Okay, and I've never heard this on any of the videos. So guys, when you're sharpening a chainsaw chain, this working corner has to be sharp. If it isn't, if you've hit something that's dulled this back a ways and it's actually bent the tooth a little bit back here or scraped it off, you'll have to file back that much till you get another point. Okay, so you want to look at this when you're filing. Now, the other thing teeth have, if you can see on this one here, this is the all new, this is called a chisel chain, and it's actually shaped like it's squared off on the side. There's also semi-chisel, and they're on weekend warrior saws or farm saws. They're actually rounded. The rounded ones are a little bit easier to sharpen. They hold their edge a little bit longer, but they don't cut quite as fast. Okay, so most of your weekend warrior saws are made that way. These ones here that are chisel tooth are usually professional chains, and I like them because you can get them really sharp. This here is my file. So I want to talk to you about how to sharpen a chainsaw chain. And some of the guys have gone over this in good detail. So like I say, Farmcraft is a good video. The guy that shows comparing all the different filing jigs and tools, he does a pretty good job on saying which ones sharpen the best. There's also, and actually in his video, he does say that this new steel gadget does work the best. And the reason it does is because this steel filing gadget always sharpens the depth gauge every time you file. So of course it's going to sharpen the fastest because it's not only sharpening the tooth, it's also taking this down another thousandth or two of an inch. So you always take the maximum amount of wood. So just so you know, as you file, every 3 or 4 times you file, this tooth is declining, is actually shrinking, it's lowering down past this depth gauge. So you're going from 25 thousandths of an inch, 24, 23, 22, whatever, every time you file. So you're going to be taking out a little bit less wood every time. So the steps, just quickly, as far as how you file a chainsaw chain. First thing you want to do is clean it of any oil. Oil will clog your file. So if there's any, and usually those teeth with excess oil sit right inside your side cover once you've run your saw for a bit. So those first few teeth, wipe the oil off of them. Usually the rest of them are fairly clean. What you want to do, it all depends on the filing system you're using, okay, and how much you have to file your cutter tooth. If you have to file your cutter tooth back a lot, if you've hit a rock or a nail or something, and you know you've got to take about 15, 20 strokes off your teeth, do your depth gauge after you file your teeth, okay, because the height of the tooth determines how far down, because your filing guide for your depth gauge sits on top of the tooth. So if you have to take this down a lot and you file your depth gauges first, once you've filed those 15, 20 strokes off of this, you're going to be down another 2, 3 thousandths of an inch. So if that's the case, do this last. If you're just a regular filing, then you may want to do it first and stay away from your, and not bother your teeth. So it all depends. It doesn't really matter. Once you have your depth gauges all the right height, then you're going to go to your teeth. You want to get the right size file for your chain. The large, what I call big chain, which is basically your 3/8 and .050 gauge. They usually take a 7/32. So my big Husqvarna's 372s, my 880 and 660 steels, they all take a 7/32 file. My Echo 600 also takes a 7/32. The next ones down, they will take a 3/16 file, and then the small ones, all your rounded teeth, so my pole saw, extended boom pole saw, my one-handed tree topping saw, they all take 5/32. And usually that it says what you need on the box of your chain. So on the big teeth, on most of my chainsaw chains, I'm using a 7/32 file, and what you're going to do is put that in the gullet, and You don't put a lot of pressure on when you're filing. Okay, another thing, it's a finesse game when you're filing. If you're putting a lot of pressure on to file, a couple things will happen. Number one, you're going to slip off a tooth and cut your fingers, which I've done 100 times. The other thing that happens is you wind up, you're taking so much time to file. Okay, filing is a finesse game. So what you want to do when you're filing is you want to file, and the pressure on your file is generally the same angle as the top of your tooth. So your pressure isn't straight back, it's down just a little bit into the gullet. So when I'm filing, my finger's usually on my file, and I'm pushing just ever so much down that same angle into the cutter tooth. Okay, so I keep filing the gullet down just like the shape of the cutter. Now, and all I'm going to do when I'm filing freehand is I'm going to take enough strokes, find the worst tooth usually first, unless it's really bad and you're going to wear down your chain. Find the worst tooth and file it, count the number of strokes, and then put the same number of strokes on every other tooth. Now, once you realize this working edge is the key, okay, the most common mistake people make when they're filing is they'll round their file. Okay, they start here filing, and then they round it out to try to catch that cutting edge, that working corner. And then they wind up putting a little bit of a bow in their tooth. Okay, don't do that. You want to keep your file going straight across, so as it goes straight across, it'll gradually wear this down at this angle until it gets back out here again to a sharp working corner. So in a nutshell, that's basically what you want to do to sharpen a chainsaw. Right now, if you go back out and file your chainsaw like you've been doing, look at that working corner, you're going to get a sharp chain. Okay? Doing it freehand, and of course, files only file in one direction, so you're filing across the tooth. Okay? Pull it clear every time, and you're going to put however many strokes on till you get back here and have a nice sharp working corner. Don't rock your saw this way. You also need to keep it horizontal. Okay? So that's, generally speaking, how you file a chain. And if you look at that working corner, the other thing you want to make sure is the length of your teeth. So this length here, when you're looking down at the top, the length of your teeth are the same on your left-handed cutters and your right-handed cutters. If you're right-handed like I am, so usually when I file and the best place to file a chainsaw, just so you know, is in a vise. Put it in a vise, and then you can buy a $20 stump vise, and that just pounds into the end of a stump, and you can put a little screw on to hold it there. But you're a lot stronger when I file right-handed this way. I can really lean on the saw. This is my preferred, of course, side because I'm right-handed. If you're like that and right-handed, always start with the left hand, which is the left-handed way, which is the right-handed cutter teeth. So the ones on this side, the right-hand side of your chainsaw, and take your file and start on this side because it's your weak side. So while your hand's good and strong, you want to file all the teeth on this side, and then turn around to your strong side and file it because you have a little bit more pressure on your strong side. Okay, so make sure these teeth are the same length. If they're not, that's when you start cutting down and your chainsaw curves to one side or the other. That's because your teeth are different lengths. Okay, so don't do that. Every 3 or 4 filings, make sure your depth gauges are the right height, and make sure you're checking that working corner. Your file also, of course, now this line here, I can't remember now whether I mentioned exactly what that's for. That's the right angle to hold your file at, which is 30 degrees. So that's a really good guide as you're filing to watch, and it's not on the semi-chisel teeth, but all the chisel tooth chains, professional chains have that. So that tells you how to hold the angle, go across till your working corner is sharp. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. I'll come back next week and I'll show you the roller guide that Husqvarna makes, and it's a pretty neat little tool, the pros and cons of it, and how to use it properly. And I'll finish off by showing you the last two that you can use on a steel or any other one, really, this flat bar style filing guide, and also the steel one. Okay, so stay tuned for those, come back. But for all those people that want to know how to file a chainsaw, you've got the tips that you needed. The working corner is the key. Make sure those are sharp on all your teeth, and then your depth gauge is the right height. 25 thousandths for softwood, for hardwood, 35 thousandths for 25 for hardwood, 35 thousandths for softwood. Because of course, a softwood is softer wood; it can take a bigger bite. Okay, so that's in a nutshell how to sharpen chainsaw chain from the old East Coast Lumberjack.